mean, look, directing is very challenging on its own. Acting and directing is even more challenging, and then acting and directing and playing a character like Ryle, and then you mix that with, the complexities of personalities on set, trying to manage everybody's expectations and get everybody kind of moving in the same direction, and
The Blake Lively legal saga has spun out of the courtroom and straight into a full-blown social media meltdown. What began as a series of lawsuits and depositions has now morphed into something far more toxic. A digital battlefield where subpoenas aren't just legal tools, but weapons shaping public opinion. Online communities that once stood united are fracturing, with creators openly feuding, accusing each other of betrayal, and fanning the flames of drama. In the middle of it all, Lively appears to be quietly benefiting from the turmoil, watching her critics implode while her own narrative stays polished.
What I can say without going too into it is that this year has been full of the highest highs and the lowest lows of my life, and I see so many women around afraid to speak, especially right now, afraid to share their experiences, and fear is by design, it's violent, but I also acknowledge that many people don't have the opportunity to speak, so I do feel fortunate, and it's the women who have had the ability to use their voice that's kept me strong and helped me in my belief and my fight for the world to be safer for women and girls.
Those who've been targeted by her legal team describe the process as draining, expensive, and deeply personal, especially when accusations spill into the public sphere. The strategy feels calculated: divide the opposition, discredit the loudest voices, and keep everyone too distracted, fighting each other to mount a strong defense. And now, just when the dust seemed ready to settle, she's preparing her boldest pivot yet. One that could drag even more people into the crossfire and push this saga into uncharted territory. Just as online chaos reached its peak, Blake Lively shifted her focus in a move that caught even her critics off guard. Instead of going after the usual legal opponents, she's now targeting two women tied to tag, one a current employee, the other a former staffer, digging into their communications in search of potential openings. Her legal team is pushing an aggressive argument that certain messages these women exchanged with others shouldn't be shielded by attorney-client privilege because of who was copied on them. To the average observer, it might sound like dry legal jargon, but insiders say it's a calculated attempt to pry into sensitive conversations that normally stay locked away. It's not the first time she's tried to chip away at privilege protections, but this time she's betting on loopholes and technicalities to give her access. The gambit is risky. If it works, she could gain documents that reshape her case. If it fails, it could expose just how far she's willing to push boundaries to gain an advantage. Either way, the move has stirred new tension and left observers wondering what she's really chasing.
Intense year, a lot of material success, and a lot of emotional stress. It's very hard on me and my family. And
the deeper this legal chess game goes, the more critics are pointing to a glaring double standard in Blake Lively's strategy. In Texas, she argued that filing for a deposition there didn't mean she was submitting to that state's jurisdiction, just a procedural step, nothing more. Yet when Perez Hilton filed for a protective order in New York, her team flipped the script, insisting that his filing meant he had fully opened himself up to New York jurisdiction. To those watching, it's a textbook case of rules for them, not for me. A legal approach shaped entirely by which outcome benefits her most in the moment. It's a tactic that might be clever in court, but dangerous in the court of public opinion, where consistency is currency. This selective framing is fueling the growing perception that she's not just fighting a case, she's controlling the narrative by bending interpretations to fit her needs. And as this inconsistency gains traction online, it's turning into yet another flashpoint, adding fuel to the already raging debate over whether her campaign is about justice, revenge, or pure image control.
I think I'm like her in the sense that we don't indulge in the gossip. We don't listen to what people say about us. You just have to turn a blind eye to it. People are gonna talk, and you can't be hurt by that. You can't listen to that. And she's really striving. These days, I live my whole life it's easier to fall into that, like talking about someone else and when you stick up for someone, you're going out on a limb when a whole group is making fun of someone. But I've really tried to have some honor in my life.
Behind the legal filings and public statements, Blake Lively's team is quietly chasing what could be their most valuable prize: access to private communications involving Wayfair, Perez Hilton, and key insiders connected to the case. These aren't random messages. They're the kind of exchanges that can reveal strategy, alliances, and vulnerabilities. Normally, such records would be shielded by attorney-client privilege or journalistic protections. But Lively's attorneys are arguing they fall outside those safeguards. They're picking apart timelines, questioning who was on email chains, and zeroing in on anyone not officially covered by legal representation as a way to crack open the door. Critics say this isn't just about evidence, it's about fishing for leverage, collecting anything that can be spun to her advantage both in court and in the media. The move is bold, but it's also walking a fine line that could backfire if the judge sees it as overreach. For now, the hunt continues, and every filing suggests Lively is determined to widen her net until she finds something that can tip the scales entirely in her favor. Lively's latest filings lean heavily on a storyline that's as emotional as it is strategic. The idea that the counterclaims against her aren't legitimate legal defenses, but acts of retaliation. Her team frames it as punishment for speaking up about harassment, a serious claim that, if accepted, could shift the entire tone of the case. But opponents argue that this narrative ignores months of behind-the-scenes tension, legal threats, and brewing disputes that predate any public allegations. To them, counterclaims were inevitable, a standard legal move in a fight this high-profile, not some personal vendetta. Employment law experts note that proving retaliation requires more than timing. It demands clear evidence that the primary motive was payback, not defense. By casting herself as the target of a coordinated effort to silence her, Lively is appealing to public sympathy while forcing her rivals to disprove intent, a tricky legal dance that can drag proceedings out for months. Whether the court buys into it remains to be seen, but for now, this retaliation angle has added another layer of drama, one that plays perfectly into the broader narrative she's been crafting all along. In a case defined by endless twists, one constant has been Judge Lyman's approach to privilege disputes. While many of his rulings have been criticized as leaning in Lively's favor, he's been surprisingly consistent when it comes to protecting attorney-client confidentiality for both sides. Observers note that he's refused to break privilege logs without a compelling reason, signaling that he views these protections as fundamental to the legal process. This history could make Lively's newest push for access to restricted communications an uphill battle, no matter how creative her legal theories. Still, she's shown no hesitation in testing those limits, banking on the possibility that persistence and pressure might eventually crack the door open. If Lyman stands firm, it could block one of her most aggressive tactics to date. But if he budges even slightly, the ripple effect could extend far beyond this case, setting a precedent other litigants might exploit in future battles. For now, all eyes are on his next decision, one that could either reinforce his reputation for guarding privilege or mark a surprising shift in how he's willing to wield his authority. While the main case charges forward, another drama is playing out on the sidelines. Lively's push for sanctions under Rule 3.6, the rule governing trial publicity. Her team claims that public statements made by opposing counsel have unfairly damaged her reputation and could influence potential jurors. It's a serious allegation, but legal analysts say sanctions of this kind are rarely granted unless the comments are blatantly prejudicial. One TikTok attorney following the case pointed out that many of the statements in question were direct responses to claims Lively's own camp had already made public. Under the rules, a lawyer can speak out if it's necessary to correct misinformation or protect a client's image. That means the sanctions request may be more about optics, painting her opponents as reckless, than about any real threat to the trial. Still, just filing for them adds another layer of pressure and feeds the perception that Lively is willing to fight on every front, both legal and PR. Whether or not the court takes it seriously, the move keeps her name at the center of the conversation, and that in itself may be the point. A recurring pattern in this saga is Lively's knack for shifting focus onto specific individuals, turning them into lightning rods for the public's anger. Critics say it's a deliberate move, undermine the credibility of anyone who might hold damaging information, and their words lose impact before they're even heard. Justin Baldoni has long been a rumoured target of this tactic, with whispers that his image has been chipped away through quiet but consistent negative framing. Now, observers believe the same approach is being aimed at other key figures tied to the case, including members of the legal and creative community who've clashed with her team. By painting opponents as untrustworthy, she controls the narrative and positions herself as the wronged party, fighting uphill against biased detractors. It's a strategy that plays well in the court of public opinion, even if it has little legal weight. But the risk is obvious. If the public catches on, the backlash could be fierce. For now, though, the tactic seems to be working, keeping the spotlight firmly on her version of events, while her rivals spend their energy defending themselves. What began as a courtroom clash has now infected the online creator space, turning former allies into open adversaries. The wave of subpoenas tied to Lively's case has forced YouTubers, influencers, and commentators into uncomfortable alliances with people they've clashed with in the past. In some cases, they're now bound together in legal responses despite having starkly different values, styles, or personal histories. The result? Tensions are boiling over in public, with creators posting pointed videos, throwing subtle jabs, and fanning speculation about each other's motives. Some observers believe this was no accident, that lumping rival voices into the same legal pool was a calculated way to sow discord. When your critics are too busy fighting among themselves, they're less effective at challenging you. And in the midst of this digital infighting, Lively's team remains focused, seemingly untouched by the collateral damage playing out across social media. Whether intentional or not, the fractures in this once-connected community have weakened its collective voice, giving her more breathing room to control the story and set the pace of the unfolding drama. With the legal filings piling up and the social media storms still raging, the next move rests in the hands of Judge Lyman. His ruling on Lively's latest privilege challenge could either shut down one of her most aggressive plays or open the door to a trove of new evidence. If she wins, the fallout could reshape the case and embolden her to push even further. If she loses, it could signal that the court has grown weary of her boundary-pushing tactics. Meanwhile, the online drama shows no sign of slowing. Creators continue to feud, alliances shift overnight, and every new filing sends ripples through the gossip ecosystem. For those watching, it feels less like a legal battle and more like a high-stakes reality show, where the stakes are reputations, careers, and public trust. The only certainty is that this saga isn't over. The real question is whether the chaos was ever a side effect, or if it was part of the plan all along. Either way, the next chapter promises more twists, and everyone is waiting to see just how far Blake Lively is willing to go to win.